Chris Mackowski of Emerging Civil War for the American Battlefield Trust. We started out on the banks of the Tennessee River in February of 1862, and now we have come all the way to late November 1864. We are in Spring Hill, Tennessee, and we've got some historically accurate weather for you. We're here at the beginning of December, just a few days after the anniversary of the affair that took place here at Spring Hill and the more stunning events that took place just up the road in Franklin, Tennessee. So we're going to talk a little bit about the action that took place here in this first video as we bring you into the Franklin campaign. John Bell Hood, he's had a heck of a time in the wake of Atlanta trying to figure out what to do. The stakes are desperate for the Confederacy, and Hood is looking for a game changer, and he sees Central Tennessee as his opportunity to do that. To talk about it, I'm going to bring in Eric Jacobson. He is the CEO of the Battle of Franklin Trust and the author of For Cause and for Country, a study of the affair at Spring Hill and the Battle of Franklin, a book I love, and we're going to find out all about it. Tell us, what's Hood looking at as he's trying to shake up that game?
Well, Hood's trying to prolong the war, trying to drag it out. It was Hood and his army that had lost Atlanta in early September 1864, and so after Atlanta fell, Hood begins developing a plan for what to do next, and really he believes there's just not a whole lot to be gained by chasing Sherman around wherever Sherman's going to go next. We, of course, today know that as the March to the Sea, but Hood believes there's an opportunity in Middle Tennessee. It's been held by U.S. troops for the better part of 2 years, but not really well defended, particularly Nashville, only about 8,000 troops in the city. Impressive ring of fortifications, but Hood sees an opportunity, and with the endorsement of Confederate President Jefferson Davis, he begins to craft this plan. He brings about 30,000 soldiers out of Georgia, across Alabama, and up into Middle Tennessee. To contest his movement into this area, William Sherman was ordered by President Lincoln and General Grant to ship troops back here to help defend the area. So John Schofield is chosen for the task. Schofield's chosen for the job on the field. George Henry Thomas was actually sent to Nashville, which is to my left, to the north. Schofield takes field command. He's got a similar number of troops to Hood, about 30,000 men, the 4th and the 23rd Corps, and the action really starts about a week before the Battle of Spring Hill and Franklin. Due south of here, the armies engage one another at various places. They come into close contact at Pulaski. They get close at Columbia, and it's at Columbia where Schofield barely slips in ahead of Hood, and Hood begins planning his next move, which is to try and outflank Schofield. Because, see, here's the game. He's not really trying just to get to Nashville and take it. Hood knows this. He has to destroy Schofield. He's got to eliminate the federal threat to have any chance of taking the Tennessee capital. So that's the goal, that's the objective, and that puts Spring Hill right in the crosshairs.
Now, we talked about, or you mentioned Sherman's March to the Sea, and of course I can't pass up the opportunity for a bad pun, so Sherman's doing the March to the Sea, and Hood's doing the March to the Tennessee. Boom, boom, yeah.
Yes.
But we did talk yesterday, earlier on the trip with Greg Biggs up at Fort Donelson, and he said that the fall of Fort Donelson leads to the fall of Nashville, and that's going to have repercussions through the entire rest of the war here in the Western Theater. And so here in November of '64, we're still seeing that. Nashville is still this focal point for both of these armies as they're trying to figure out what to do. So as the Confederates move in, why is it that they're still kind of pushing in that direction so strongly?
You know, that's a great point, because this was always like, not just Nashville, but this whole area was like a lost jewel for white Southerners. You know, they'd lost it early, they hadn't been able to get it back, and everything has gone wrong in Tennessee. I mean, every possible bad decision, every possible outcome has gone against them. You know, really from Donelson through Shiloh, Murfreesboro, and on. Chickamauga is a victory, but of course it leads to the debacle at Chattanooga. So Hood takes the initiative, and he believes there's a chance by roaring up here to maybe prolong the war, maybe drag it out. And it's so key to remember that we have the benefit of knowing how things played out. Everybody on both sides knew that this was a legitimate, bona fide threat. And I would argue that the best evidence of how dangerous Hood's army was comes from those on the other side. The federal commanders and the federal soldiers said repeatedly that Hood's army posed a very real threat to Nashville.
I want to bring on Gary Edelman, who is pacing wildly across this open field. Smart thoughts going on, Gary?
I don't know about that last one. Thanks, Chris. So we got to get to the battle itself, but before I do, I just want to say that it's undeniable that the work of the Battle of Franklin Trust and their partners locally, has really just changed the landscape here. The Trust has worked with them to save a lot of land at Franklin and whatnot. I just want to take the opportunity to say that they are rocking social media now. You might not have seen a big presence, but go ahead and like Carnton and Carter House. Carnton, Carnton, and Carter House on Facebook. Go to their YouTube channel, Battle of Franklin Trust. Give them a subscribe, and I think you're going to see a video every day or close to it, and I think it's going to be things that you enjoy. So, Eric, we've got Hood up here. I'm still curious about what you think about whether Hood's going to turn east and try to capture Washington or something like that. But beside that, let's get to the battle too. What's going on here?
I will say, I think the whole, I'm going to go into Kentucky and swing east and save Lee in Virginia was a lot of post-war posturing, because as much as I try and give Hood a fair shake, I think he had to make the campaign a little bit bigger and more important.
Yeah.
This is all about Nashville. And so on November 28th, Hood crafts this plan to try and get his army between Schofield at Columbia and Franklin. Midway point between the two, Spring Hill, Tennessee. And so Hood lays out on paper really what is a very, very bold and well-conceived plan. He leaves a third of his army in Columbia to the south of here. He moves 2/3 of the army around to the east. And by mid-afternoon, he has about 2/3 of his army nearly 10 miles behind Schofield's forces. Schofield has yet to figure out exactly what Hood is up to until it's almost too late. But Schofield made one really good decision. He sent George Wagner's division north to Spring Hill, and Wagner gets here at about noon. Wagner's coming up the road behind me. He forms a rough semicircle around the town. The ground we're standing on is held by one of the brigades in Wagner's division, Luther Bradley. Luther Bradley's guys number about 1,500. Their job is to monitor the Confederate movements coming up from the south or southeast, because Schofield now believes it is very possible, and of course it was very true, that Hood was attempting to flank him. So about 3:45 in the afternoon, leading elements of the Confederate army is coming up from my front right, Frank Cheatham's corps. He deploys initially Pat Claiborne's division. Most everyone knows Claiborne, one of the best, if not the best, division commander, not just in the Confederate Army, but I would argue in the war as a whole. Claiborne's men advanced. Their objective, real simple, trying to block Columbia Pike, which is about 3/4 of a mile due west of here. They have no idea. This hill, which was wooded at the time, mostly is filled with Bradley's men. Why don't they know that? Big failing on the side of the Confederates earlier in the day. Nathan Bedford Forrest cavalry had been sparring and banging away with Wagner most of the day. Never figured out they were dealing with infantry, and Claiborne's men advancing toward the road to my right run right into Bradley's troops, and a furious fight ensues. There were people, I remember when I worked on my first book, who said, there was never a battle of Spring Hill. There absolutely was a battle here. It just gets overshadowed by Franklin. There are easily 600 or 700 casualties when it's all over. Right here and on the ground behind me, 400 or 500 of those casualties like that. 10 or 15 minutes of furious combat between Claiborne and Bradley. But what Claiborne does, wheels his division around, caves in Bradley's brigade. Bradley himself is so badly wounded they barely get him off the field. And then Bradley's guys begin running to the north. Claiborne's men in pursuit, but big problems already. John Bell Hood's plan to block the road is coming unraveled, because Claiborne, by attacking Bradley and moving that direction to the north, he's now not moving toward the road. And this begins a series of catastrophic events for the Confederate Army that lead to the affair at Spring Hill and ultimately the escape of the U.S. Army. Bottom line, here's what happens. Claiborne, within moments, is halted. He's stopped. Frank Cheatham orders him to stop. He has another division moving into play south of here, closer to Rippavilla. They're also ordered to stop. Sun soon sets, it gets dark. All sorts of command paralysis sets in on the Confederate side. But right here and behind me is where the fighting erupts, and this action is so key. I can't stress this enough. If the Federal troops had not disjointed Cleburne's movement. If they hadn't thrown Hood's entire if they hadn't thrown Hood's entire movement off the tracks, Cleburne moves toward that road unmolested and blocks it. And then, who knows what happens. But right here is where everything started to turn on a dime.
One of the things that I find really interesting is that as more Confederates come online, they extend up that way instead of pushing in the direction they're supposed to. Now, Hood is back at Oak Lawn, which is his headquarters, and he's getting reports about what's going on. Why does he stay back there instead of coming up himself to see and put eyes on the ground?
You know, good question. I don't have a good answer for that, but I don't think that it's really the commanding general's job to actually be the tactical commander. You know, that's why he's the commanding general. That's why he has corps commanders and division commanders. And let's not forget, these Confederate commanders, they may not be as well disciplined and oiled as the Army of Northern Virginia, but you got guys like Cleburne and Cheatham and Forrest and A.P. Stewart. These are seasoned veterans. Frankly, they should know what to do, except everything that could go wrong did. And I can't say it enough. As human beings, we make mistakes. And Pat Cleburne and Frank Cheatham and John Bell Hood, those three men never anticipated they were going to run into resistance. That's a huge failing on the side of the Confederate cavalry, because what's the Cavs' job? Eyes and ears of the Army, know where the enemy's at. And when the whole thing started to fall, when that sort of pyramid started to collapse, it just falls in on itself, and then it gets dark. And you know, troops didn't like to run around in the dark and fight, and nobody really moved under cover of darkness, not in huge numbers in the American Civil War. And so when Schofield begins his withdrawal, which is a retreat northward, the Confederates, it's not even in their thought process. I mean, it's a little bit like those, you know, days before Pearl Harbor, or days before 9/11. You know, you're not thinking anything like this is going to happen. And oh my God, it's actually happening. And to understand the complexities of it, man, you've got to walk the ground. I mean, when we're not standing on a flat field. You know, line of sight and the way sound gets muffled, and the way that your inability to actually see certain things, plus darkness just shrouds everything. There's just so much to really soak in here to get a better sense of how the Confederates really just made every mistake possible.
And there's still a chance for the Confederates to salvage things. We're going to talk about that in a second, but before we do, dun dun dun, I want to bring Gary back on, because we're going to take advantage of one of Gary's favorite pastimes.
Yes, because, you know, we were getting all serious about battle, and I'm really good at trite. So Eric doesn't know we're doing this, but I've been bombarding people all the time. So it's time for today's edition of Middle Name Trivia. We're going to start out easy. John Hood.
Bell.
Samuel E. Updike.
I don't know.
Yes, you do. It's his real name.
Oh my, is it? Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Okay, what is it?
Emerson.
All right, Nathan Forrest.
Bedford.
John M. Schofield.
McAllister.
Boom. George H. Thomas.
Henry.
All right, and did we cover anybody else?
So we have issues if we know these people's middle names, don't we?
That's good enough for me. Continue, gentlemen.
So you talk about darkness falling on the battlefield, a lot of communication issues, a lot of confusion, lack of intelligence. The Confederates still have an opportunity to salvage this as more of them come onto the field south of here, ground we're going to go look at in just a few moments. But is there a chance the Confederates could still pull off victory here?
Well, there certainly was, because there are two full Confederate corps on the field, and you said there's a ton of communication, but there's just not a lot of action. In fact, to my front, which is almost due east, after all of the action with Cheatham's corps, A.P. Stewart's corps is moved up behind Cheatham, and Hood intends to try and block the road to the north of town, because the Columbia Turnpike doesn't run just north and south, kind of runs northeast to southwest. So if Stewart keeps moving, he'd block the road north of town, but he gets lost. He can't find his way in all of the confusion and the darkness. He bivouacs his men. It's incredible, even for me all these years later, to think about 20,000 Southern troops, some of them 200, 300, 400 yards away. Others are, you know, upwards of a third to a half mile away. But two-thirds of Hood's army is strung out along these hills east of Franklin. But you know what's happening? John Schofield's taking the initiative. Sometimes it's so easy to focus on everything the Confederates didn't do. We should also focus on what the U.S. Army did. And Schofield took the initiative. He put forth on the table a sound plan. He was a leader that night and moved his troops all the way new moon. So it's not just dark, it's completely dark. And he moves almost 30,000 men, 800 supply wagons, about 7,000 horses and mules, 60 pieces of artillery up one road in the darkness, and he moved almost, check this, 30 miles. He did this. He moved 30 miles in 15 hours.
I just want to say that's great. And here we are, and we've neglected to say that all the land around you, huge tracts of land as far as the eye can see practically, has been preserved by the American Battlefield Trust and our partners. So this is great because here we got the battlefield, but we've also got the scene of, what we're going to talk about next at our next stop. Come on, Chris, because we got more preserved land there and a great story to tell.
We're going to go from one great preserved piece of land to another thanks to the Franklin Battlefield Trust. We've got great interpretation of both, and so we're going to go from here just a little further south to a plantation called Ripavilla, and we're going to explore some of the mythology, some of the great questions, some of the unanswered opportunities that exist here at Spring Hill. Gary, thank you so much. Eric, thank you so much. Chris White behind the camera, thank you so much. And you at home, thank you so much for being with us and supporting this trip and for supporting battlefield preservation.